The story of the Mitsubishi A6M Zero begins long before the Pacific War erupted. In the 1930s, the Imperial Japanese Navy faced a rapidly changing world of aviation. Aircraft carriers were becoming central to naval strategy, and the ability to project air power over vast distances was paramount. Japan's naval leaders understood that future conflicts would demand fighters that could operate from carriers, escort bombers, and dominate the skies. They envisioned a fighter that could outmaneuver anything the Allies might produce and fly farther than any current aircraft could dream. The challenge was immense. Create an aircraft that could win battles before they even began. At the heart of this vision was Jiro Horikoshi, a young aeronautical engineer at Mitsubishi. Horikoshi had already demonstrated ingenuity in aircraft design, but the Navy's requirements for the new fighter pushed him to the limits of innovation. The task was clear yet daunting. Design a lightweight, agile fighter capable of long-range missions, with enough speed and maneuverability to outfight any enemy aircraft. Every design decision mattered. Weight had to be minimized, engines optimized, and armaments carefully selected. Armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, common in contemporary designs, were sacrificed to achieve performance. Horikoshi knew the risks. Without protection, a single bullet could destroy the aircraft or kill its pilot. Yet the potential payoff was unmatched aerial dominance. Prototypes emerged in the late 1930s, testing innovative concepts that emphasized agility and range. Engineers experimented with radial engines, wing designs, and lightweight materials. The Nakajima Saki engine, powerful yet light, became the core of the design. Horikoshi and his team focused on every detail. Control surfaces had to respond instantly, the airframe had to flex without braking, and the aircraft had to climb and turn with precision. Early test pilots described the experience as almost surreal. The aircraft responded to commands as if it anticipated them, climbing, diving, and banking with fluidity that seemed impossible for a machine. The Japanese Navy named the aircraft the A6M Zero, or Ryzen in Japanese, signifying a carrier-based fighter of the highest order. Initial training programs emphasized mastery of the plane's unique characteristics. Pilots learned energy management, high-angle turns, and the importance of using the Zero's lightweight frame to their advantage. Unlike heavier Allied fighters, the Zero could outmaneuver most opponents in dogfights. Pilots discovered that climbing rapidly, diving, and executing tight turns allowed them to dominate engagements. In essence, the aircraft transformed the pilot into a weapon, a lethal extension of skill, reflex, and intuition. When the Zero first entered operational service, its potential was unprecedented. Carrier squadrons trained rigorously, practicing formation flying, long-range escort missions, and simulated combat against older aircraft. The emphasis was always on maximizing the advantages of the plane's light weight and agility. Japanese doctrine emphasized the strengths of the aircraft. Avoid head-on confrontations with heavier planes, exploit vertical maneuvers, and strike with precision from positions of advantage. The Zero's long range allowed it to escort bombers hundreds of miles from carriers, extending Japan's reach across the Pacific and creating a formidable force projection capability. By the time Japan prepared for war in 1941, the Zero was ready to make its mark. In the skies over the Pacific, no Allied aircraft could match its combination of speed, agility, and endurance. Pilots quickly realized the psychological effect it had on opponents. Allied airmen reported panic at the sight of the sleek, responsive fighter banking and diving with precision. The Zero could appear almost anywhere, strike with deadly accuracy, and vanish before countermeasures could be mounted. It was a revolutionary aircraft, and its design ensured that early encounters would be disastrous for the enemy. The first combat test of the Zero came during the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Japanese carrier groups launched waves of aircraft to strike the Pacific Fleet at anchor. Among them, Zero pilots dominated the airspace, engaging American fighters and providing escort for bombers with unmatched skill. The aircraft's speed allowed pilots to intercept defenders before they could reach bombers, while its maneuverability ensured survival even against numerically superior foes. Observers later described the action as almost theatrical. The Zeros appeared in groups, diving, climbing, and turning with precision, while American planes struggled to respond effectively. The Zero's early success demonstrated the deadly combination of innovative design, pilot training, and tactical doctrine. The Zero's advantages were not limited to speed and agility. Its endurance allowed it to escort bombers across vast stretches of the Pacific, something few other fighters could achieve. On missions lasting hours, the aircraft maintained performance and reliability. Pilots reported that the Zero's controls remained responsive throughout long sorties, allowing precision in both offensive and defensive maneuvers. This endurance gave Japanese commanders confidence in planning extended operations, knowing that their fighters could remain effective far from carriers and bases. The combination of range, maneuverability, and pilot training created an aircraft that was virtually untouchable in the early months of the Pacific War. Yet the Zero's brilliance came with risks. Its light construction meant that it was vulnerable to even small-caliber fire. Unlike Allied aircraft, it lacked armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks. A single well-aimed shot could destroy the plane or fatally wound the pilot. In addition, the emphasis on maneuverability made the aircraft difficult for inexperienced pilots to handle at the limits of its performance. Training and discipline were critical, and the most effective pilots understood the necessity of combining skill with the aircraft's design strengths. In the hands of untrained or overconfident pilots, the Zero could become a liability. Despite these vulnerabilities, the Zero quickly established dominance in the skies. During the early campaigns in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies, the aircraft demonstrated its capability to control airspace with limited numbers. Allied pilots struggled to adjust to the combination of speed, maneuverability, and tactical skill employed by Japanese squadrons. Stories from these campaigns describe Allied units being caught off guard, their formations disrupted, and their bombers decimated by rapid, precise attacks. The Zero's reputation grew as its pilots executed missions with apparent impunity, reinforcing the perception that the aircraft was unbeatable. Field reports from the Allies highlighted the difficulty of countering the Zero. Experienced pilots noted that traditional dogfighting tactics were often ineffective. Attempting to outturn the aircraft resulted in catastrophic losses, as the Zero could respond instantly to threats. Pilots were forced to develop new strategies, emphasizing energy retention, diving attacks, and coordinated team maneuvers. "We had to fight smarter, not harder," one veteran American pilot later wrote. The Zero taught us that skill and tactics could sometimes match brute force, but only if we adapted quickly. The early victories of the Zero were also a testament to Japanese naval strategy. The aircraft's design was closely integrated with carrier operations, allowing the Navy to project power across vast distances with precision. Coordinated attacks, disciplined formation flying, and careful planning ensured that the Zero's advantages were fully utilized. Pilots trained to exploit the aircraft's strengths, striking enemy formations at the right moment and retreating before they could be countered. The synergy between aircraft design, pilot training, and naval strategy created an air weapon of unprecedented effectiveness. As 1942 progressed, the Zero's reputation only grew. During the invasions of Burma and the early Solomon Islands campaigns, the aircraft proved decisive in maintaining Japanese air superiority. Allied forces were forced to innovate, develop tactics that leveraged heavier, armored aircraft, and emphasized teamwork to survive encounters. Yet in the first years of War World II in the Pacific, the Zero was the standard by which other fighters were judged. Its combination of design brilliance, pilot skill, and tactical employment made it a symbol of Japanese military ingenuity and a nightmare for the Allies. The legacy of the Zero's design is clear in the accounts of its pilots. Veterans recall the sense of control, the responsiveness, and the freedom the aircraft provided. "It is like the plane knows what I want to do before I even move the stick," one pilot described. The aircraft's balance of speed, range, and agility allowed daring tactics, including vertical maneuvers, coordinated strikes, and solo interception missions. It became a tool that amplified the pilot's skill and reshaped air combat in the Pacific. By the end of Part 1, the Zero had emerged as a revolutionary aircraft. Its lightweight construction, exceptional maneuverability, and extended range challenged Allied forces in unprecedented ways. Pilots learned to exploit its advantages, naval planners integrated it into carrier doctrine, and early battles demonstrated its destructive potential. The Zero had not only arrived, but was poised to dominate the Pacific skies, shaping the course of the early War World II battles and leaving a lasting imprint on aerial combat strategy. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero's true power became evident when it first faced combat in the skies over the Pacific. In December 1941, Japanese carrier groups launched their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, and the Zero emerged as the spearhead of the assault. As wave after wave of aircraft swept across Oahu, American pilots scrambled to intercept them. But the Zero, with its incredible speed and maneuverability, was unlike anything they had encountered. Pilots reported that the Japanese fighters could appear above, below, and beside them in seconds, striking with precision and vanishing just as quickly. The opening hours of the Pacific War demonstrated a terrifying reality for Allied airmen. Traditional tactics were often ineffective. Attempts to dogfight the Zero using conventional turn-based methods frequently ended in disaster. In one encounter, an American pilot later recounted how a Zero executing a tight vertical loop appeared directly above him and fired without warning. The speed and agility of the aircraft, combined with the skill of its pilots, created a psychological edge that was almost as deadly as its guns. "You weren't just fighting a plane," one survivor said. "You were fighting an idea, a machine that seemed to know no limits." Beyond Pearl Harbor, the Zero's effectiveness continued in the invasions of the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies. Japanese pilots, trained rigorously in formation flying and energy management, used the Zero's strength to overwhelm Allied forces. The aircraft's light frame allowed rapid climbing and tight turns, while its range enabled long-distance escorts for bombers on extended missions. Each sortie reinforced the perception that the Zero was virtually unbeatable. And for Allied pilots, the early months of the war were a period of constant adaptation and fear. The psychological effect of the Zero on Allied forces cannot be overstated. American and British pilots described encounters as surreal and unreal. The aircraft's nimbleness allowed it to outmaneuver heavier fighters and maintain control of the air. One pilot wrote, "It felt like every time we thought we had a shot, the Zero was already somewhere else, ready to strike." This constant uncertainty forced Allied airmen to rethink traditional dogfighting principles, placing a premium on teamwork, positioning, and exploiting the aircraft's weaknesses. While the Zero's dominance was impressive, it was not without limits. The aircraft's emphasis on lightweight design and maneuverability came at the cost of protection. Early on, the Zero lacked armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks, making it vulnerable to even small-caliber fire. Pilots who learned to exploit these weaknesses could survive engagements despite the aircraft's speed and agility. Allied forces began to understand that energy tactics, using altitude, speed, and dive attacks, could counter the Zero's maneuvering advantage. These early lessons, though learned at great cost, laid the groundwork for later successes against Japanese fighters. During the Battle of the Philippines, Zero pilots executed daring tactics that showcased both the aircraft's strengths and Japanese strategic thinking. Escorting bombers over long distances, they engaged American fighters with precision, forcing the defenders into reactive positions. Pilots relied on disciplined formation flying, maintaining energy advantage while coordinating attacks to maximize damage. Accounts from survivors describe waves of Zeros striking in unison, overwhelming gunner positions and disrupting defensive lines. The combination of aircraft design, pilot skill, and strategic application created a force multiplier that allowed relatively small numbers of aircraft to dominate vast airspaces. The Zero's ability to dominate in both offensive and defensive roles was unmatched. Its range allowed it to escort bombers on long sorties, protecting vulnerable assets deep within enemy territory. Its maneuverability enabled pilots to engage multiple adversaries simultaneously, often turning numerical inferiority into tactical superiority. In the early stages of the war, the Zero's presence effectively dictated the outcome of engagements, shaping the operational environment before battles even began. Allied commanders had to adjust expectations and develop new doctrines to contend with this unprecedented threat. In the skies over Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, the Zero also highlighted the limitations of Allied aircraft at the time. British and Dutch fighters, heavier and less agile, struggled to match the Zero in traditional dogfights. Reports from pilots indicated that attempts to engage in turning battles resulted in rapid losses, often before reinforcements could arrive. The aircraft's combination of speed, climb rate, and tight turning radius allowed Japanese pilots to control engagements, choosing when and how to fight. It's like chasing a shadow that can strike back, one Allied pilot recalled. The Zero's tactical flexibility became a defining characteristic, reinforcing its reputation as a revolutionary fighter. Training was another critical factor in the Zero's early success. Japanese naval aviators underwent rigorous preparation, focusing on formation discipline, energy management, and coordinated strikes. The aircraft itself demanded skilled handling. Inexperienced pilots risked losing control in aggressive maneuvers. This emphasis on training ensured that the Zero's advantages were fully realized in combat. Pilots learned to anticipate enemy actions, exploit their aircraft's strengths, and operate as cohesive units. The result was not just an aircraft, but a system. Design, doctrine, and human skill intertwined to create battlefield dominance. The early months of war demonstrated the Zero's ability to influence strategic outcomes. Carrier raids, island invasions, and air superiority missions were all shaped by the aircraft's presence. Allied forces often had to postpone operations, divert resources, or accept losses because the Zero controlled the skies. Its impact extended beyond individual engagements. It affected planning, morale, and the allocation of forces. The psychological dimension of air superiority was as critical as the physical threat. Fear of the Zero forced caution, hesitation, and adjustment, giving Japanese commanders a substantial advantage in the early Pacific campaigns. Despite the Zero's successes, Allied forces began to identify ways to counter it. Analysis of its strengths and weaknesses revealed that while it excelled in maneuverability, it was less effective in sustained high-speed dives or against heavily armored aircraft. Pilots adapted by employing boom and zoom tactics, attacking from higher altitudes, using superior speed to deliver strikes, and then retreating before the Zero could react. Teamwork became essential, as coordinated attacks increased the probability of hitting and disabling the fragile fighter. These adaptations required patience and discipline, but gradually allowed the Allies to challenge the Zero's supremacy. The turning point in understanding the Zero's vulnerabilities came during engagements over the Solomon Islands. Allied pilots, flying aircraft such as the F-4F Wildcat, discovered that by maintaining energy advantage, diving, and avoiding turning engagements, they could inflict damage without being outmaneuvered. Early victories were hard-won and came at a high cost, but they demonstrated that the Zero was not invincible. Its early dominance, while terrifying, could be contested with innovation, strategy, and courage. "We learned to respect it, but we also learned how to fight it," one veteran said. Even as counter-tactics emerged, the Zero remained a formidable opponent. Its performance in early battles ensured that Japanese forces retained air superiority in critical campaigns for months. Allied losses were significant, and the aircraft's reputation continued to grow. Pilots and commanders on both sides recognized that the Zero represented a new era in aerial combat, one in which speed, maneuverability, and pilot skill could outweigh raw firepower and armor. It was an aircraft that reshaped the dynamics of air warfare in the Pacific theater. The psychological impact of the Zero persisted throughout 1942. Allied airmen described encounters with a mixture of fear, respect, and fascination. The aircraft's responsiveness, precision, and reliability inspired both dread and admiration. Even when countermeasures were developed, the Zero's early dominance influenced how air combat was taught, planned, and executed. The lessons learned from facing the Zero would inform Allied tactics for the rest of the war, shaping doctrines that emphasized teamwork, energy management, and the exploitation of enemy weaknesses. Japanese pilots, on the other hand, developed a sense of confidence and identity tied to the Zero. Stories from veterans recall the exhilaration of executing complex maneuvers, the pride of mastering an aircraft that demanded skill, and the camaraderie formed through shared experiences in combat. The Zero became a symbol of Japanese naval aviation prowess, a representation of innovation, courage, and tactical excellence. Its early successes reinforced the belief that Japan could project power across the Pacific with precision and effectiveness. By the end of 1942, the Zero had achieved legendary status. From Pearl Harbor to the Dutch East Indies, from the skies over Malaya to the Solomons, it dominated in both perception and performance. Its combination of design brilliance, pilot training, and tactical employment created an air superiority that few Allied aircraft could match. The lessons learned from encountering the Zero, both its strengths and its vulnerabilities, would define aerial combat in the Pacific for the years to come. Even as new Allied aircraft began to challenge it, the Zero's early dominance remained undeniable. It was a fighter that shouldn't have existed, defying conventional design norms and tactical expectations. Its impact on pilots, commanders, and the course of the Pacific War was profound, shaping the strategies, adaptations, and innovations that would eventually lead to the Allied victory. In the opening chapters of War World II in the Pacific, the Zero was not just a machine. It was a phenomenon, a symbol of lethal ingenuity that left an indelible mark on history. By 1943, the initial dominance of the Mitsubishi A6M Zero began to face its first real tests. Allied forces, after suffering devastating losses in the opening months of the Pacific War, had adapted. Aircraft like the Grumman F-6F Hellcat and the Vought F-4U Corsair entered the theater, combining speed, firepower, and durability that could challenge the Zero's early supremacy. Pilots had learned the weaknesses of the aircraft. Its lack of armor, its vulnerability to concentrated fire, and its inability to sustain prolonged high-speed dives. With these insights, the tide of air superiority began to shift. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 had already foreshadowed the challenge. Japanese forces attempted to seize strategic points in New Guinea, and the Zero, despite its incredible agility and range, was countered by well-coordinated Allied strikes. Pilots executing boom and zoom tactics, attacking from higher altitude and retreating before Zeros could respond, demonstrated that careful planning and energy management could offset the aircraft's natural advantages. Though the Zero remained lethal, the psychological edge it had enjoyed in 1941-42 was beginning to erode. The pivotal Battle of Midway further underscored the changing dynamics. Japanese carrier aviation, previously unchallenged, faced not only resilient American pilots, but also sophisticated intelligence and coordination. Zeros escorted dive bombers and torpedo planes into combat, but they could not prevent the catastrophic losses suffered by the Japanese fleet. The aircraft's performance remained exceptional, but strategy and numbers had become as decisive as individual prowess. For the first time, the Zero's limits were exposed in large-scale engagements. Japanese pilots noted that their aircraft could no longer guarantee air dominance without meticulous planning and coordination. Guadalcanal, the crucible of jungle warfare and attrition, further tested the Zero's capabilities. Engaged in intense air battles over the Solomon Islands, pilots faced relentless pressure from better armored, faster, and more heavily armed Allied aircraft. American fighters now emphasized teamwork and discipline, using altitude advantage and coordinated attacks to exploit the Zero's vulnerabilities. The aircraft's fragility became more apparent. Pilots who had previously relied on maneuverability to evade danger now had to contend with sustained, precise fire. Losses among Japanese aviators mounted, reflecting the gradual erosion of the early dominance that had defined the opening years of the war. Despite these challenges, the Zero continued to be used in innovative ways. Its long range and agility made it ideal for reconnaissance missions, intercepting Allied bombers and providing tactical support in carrier operations. Japanese pilots, adapting to the changing battlefield, developed more disciplined energy tactics, leveraging the aircraft's strengths while minimizing exposure to Allied firepower. Kamikaze missions later in the war also relied on the Zero's reliability and range, transforming the aircraft into a symbol of desperation and dedication. Its role had shifted from supreme air superiority fighter to a versatile tool in a war that increasingly favored Allied industrial and technological advantage. The human stories of the Zero's pilots reflect the aircraft's extraordinary impact. Veterans describe the thrill and terror of dogfighting in the Pacific skies, where a single aircraft could decide life or death in seconds. Training, discipline, and experience determined survival. Some pilots became legends, their skill magnified by the Zero's responsiveness and agility. Others fell, victims of a changing battlefield where Allied aircraft could now exploit the weaknesses that had been ignored during the early years. The Zero shaped not only tactics and outcomes, but also the lives and legacies of those who flew it. Allied pilots, meanwhile, had developed a profound respect for the aircraft. Encounters with Zeros in 1943-44 were markedly different from those in 1941-42. Pilots approached engagements with caution, using teamwork and strategic positioning to survive. Debriefings often emphasized lessons learned. Altitude advantage, controlled bursts, and disciplined coordination were key to countering the once feared fighter. "It's still fast and deadly," one American ace reflected, "but now we know its limits. Knowledge is power, and with strategy, we can fight it and survive." These adaptations transformed the nature of air combat in the Pacific and highlighted the evolving interplay between technology and tactics. The Zero's legacy extends far beyond its battlefield record. As a design, it exemplified the extremes of innovation: light, agile, and long range, but at the cost of protection and durability. Its performance influenced post-war aircraft engineering, inspiring designers to balance speed, maneuverability, and survivability. Lessons learned from the Zero shaped both Japanese and Allied approaches to fighter development, highlighting the importance of understanding the trade-offs inherent in any design. The aircraft became a case study in the interplay between engineering brilliance and operational limitations. Culturally, the Zero became a symbol of Japanese aerial prowess, and later, of the sacrifices demanded by total war. Stories from veterans, historians, and civilians alike emphasize the awe inspired by its early dominance, the fear it instilled in Allied pilots, and the eventual recognition of its limitations. The aircraft's image appeared in propaganda, literature, and film, cementing its place in collective memory as an icon of War World II aviation. Its legacy is multifaceted. Technical marvel, psychological weapon, and historical artifact. The engineering lessons of the Zero are particularly striking. Designers had prioritized agility and range, understanding that these qualities could define victory in air combat. But in doing so, they exposed pilots to increased risk. The trade-off between performance and protection illustrates a fundamental principle in military engineering. No design is perfect, and every advantage carries a corresponding vulnerability. Horikoshi's team achieved remarkable success, but the aircraft's later vulnerabilities serve as a reminder that even revolutionary technology must be matched by strategic awareness and adaptability. By the final years of the Pacific War, the Zero was increasingly outclassed by Allied aircraft, yet it remained in service due to its versatility and the demands of a protracted conflict. Kamikaze missions, defensive interceptions, and carrier-based operations kept the aircraft in operational use, even as technological superiority shifted decisively to the Allies. Its enduring presence underscores the intersection of necessity, tradition, and innovation. The Zero could no longer dominate the skies, but it could still influence the battlefield in meaningful ways. The story of the Zero also illustrates the evolution of air combat doctrine. Early reliance on maneuverability and agility gave way to integrated strategies, emphasizing energy management, teamwork, and firepower. Both Japanese and Allied forces learned that technological advantage is only as effective as the tactics employed to exploit it. The Zero forced innovation, adaptation, and strategic thinking on both sides, accelerating the development of aerial combat principles that would shape aviation long after the war ended. Today, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero stands as one of the most iconic aircraft of War World II. Museums around the world preserve examples, allowing new generations to study its design and performance. Its early dominance, later vulnerability, and lasting influence provide lessons in innovation, strategy, and human courage. Pilots who flew the aircraft, whether victorious or ultimately defeated, left a legacy that intertwines technical brilliance with personal valor. The Zero was more than a plane. It was a symbol of an era, a reflection of both ambition and the realities of war. The Zero story is ultimately one of paradox. It was an aircraft that shouldn't have existed in the sense that its design pushed conventional limits. A fragile fighter capable of dominating the skies through maneuverability, range, and pilot skill. Yet it did exist, and for the opening years of the Pacific War, it was virtually unbeatable. Its dominance forced adaptation, innovation, and courage from those who faced it. Its vulnerabilities taught lessons that shaped the course of aerial combat. In every sense, the Zero redefined what a fighter could be, leaving an enduring mark on the history of aviation and the Pacific theater of War World II. As historians reflect on the Zero, its influence becomes clear. It reshaped naval aviation doctrine, influenced aircraft design philosophy, and provided a benchmark against which other fighters were measured. The aircraft's early successes demonstrated the power of combining design innovation with rigorous training and tactical discipline. Its later vulnerabilities revealed the consequences of sacrificing protection for performance. Together, these lessons make the Zero a subject of enduring fascination for engineers, historians, and aviation enthusiasts alike.